Welcome to this week's episode of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. Grab a seat at the table as Masters rowing coaches Marlene Royal and Rebecca Caro share their biggest secrets on how to unleash your hidden potential and plot a new course for real results on the water and off. Now, on to the show.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. Rebecca Caro, and I'm joined by Marlene Royal.
Hello, Rebecca, and hello to our Faster Masters Rowing audience. Good to be here today.
Today, we're continuing our head racing series, and we're talking about the challenges that come up in a head race today. But first, I wanted to say a big hi to Mr. Picard of Seattle, because according to Maggie Coffee, he loves my voice. And so I thought I'd surprise him and see if he's listening and shout out. So, head racing. We've done 3 episodes so far on all sorts of different aspects of doing long distance head races. But today I want to talk about the challenges, because no rower ever has gone from the dock through their warm up into the marshalling area, through the start line, done the entire race, finished the race, back to the dock without something unexpected happening. It just doesn't happen. Some of the things are happening because of you. You do a fluff stroke. Some are happening because of some external factor. Could be another athlete or a crew or weather. So challenges are completely normal. And so when you are doing head races, the main thing that you need to realize is that all of your practice races that you've ever done in your entire athletic career are building you an experience base. And that experience base is the thing that is going to serve you well in this race that you're doing today. Big challenges, Marlene. Kick off. What's your fave? What's your fave nightmare scenario?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, just about expect the unexpected. I mean, it sounds a little bit trite, but anything can happen. What happens if your oar flies out of your hand and you have to reach and catch it? What if somebody catches a boat stopping crab? What if the starters start you in the wrong order? What if you have a collision? What if, what if you really go off course and get a lot of penalties for going off course? I mean, there are just a tremendous amount of things that can happen, especially when you're in a race where there are a lot of crews and there are a lot of boats moving around you, and you may not be accustomed to rowing in such traffic. I mean, and that is often a big factor, certainly for single scullers who often are training alone, and then they get into a head race situation and they've got people passing them. They've got to pass people. They're on maybe an unfamiliar course. Maybe they never had a chance to row the course. So there can be a lot of challenges that come at you that are not only up to you, but also what other crews and boats may do to affect you as they're moving around you.
So you expect the unexpected, but the key here is you should know your response to a range of different situations. What are you going to do when a challenge arises is the key. And so today, what we're going to be talking about is we're going to talk about how to stay warm in the start area. We're going to talk about wind and waves. We're going to talk about turning buoys. And we're going to talk about the sorts of responses that you can practice in training. And if you can't practice them in training, if you know about them, that will help you. So a little segue into a piece of work done by a university friend of mine called Marcus Buckingham, who's now a world famous management guru. He studied long distance lorry drivers, and he found that there was a whole cohort of them who for some reason had fewer accidents than anyone else. And they couldn't work out, why did these people not have, statistically, if you're on the roads, you're going to have an accident. at some point. And they found, after interviewing them and comparing their responses with the others, that the main thing that these people did differently was that when they saw someone driving erratically, they thought, oh, if that person does this, then I will do that. Yeah, an avoidance measure. And of course, what happened as a result was, should the unexpected happen, which of course it does sometimes, they had already thought through what they were going to do. And in that way, they were able to have fewer accidents. So in your head racing, learning what you might do as a result of a challenge situation, even if it's thinking about it rather than necessarily experiencing it, will help you. So let's kick off with how to stay warm while you're marshalling. So you do your best to arrive in good time for your race. You will have to get to a certain part of the river. You'll have to line up. You may or may not have a long amount of time there due to all sorts of other things outside of your control, like the race could be running late. There's nothing you can do about that. And staying warm, for me personally, is always a really big challenge. What are your best tips?
Well, I mean, again, depending on the temperature, but let's assume it's cool and you need to keep moving. Thinking about what kind of clothing can you have with you that you can keep on until the last moment, which also isn't going to be a lot of weight to carry in the boat. So there, you may have certain lightweight insulating types of shirts or wind jackets that can be good just to keep on to keep your muscles warm. One of the things that I like to advise to crews and sometimes to single scullers is, if you're in a marshalling area and you don't have a lot of room, like for example, sometimes you have room where you can row a small circle and you've got enough room to do that. But sometimes you don't have enough room to do that. And so you don't have the ability when you're waiting to move around a lot. One of the things I suggest is, if you're lined up and you're waiting for them to call the people from the start, and you've got to keep an eye on who the boat starting in front of you and who's behind you, you can do the drill that we call the push-pull drill, which is basically a rowing in place drill. So that you're keeping your blades in the water, you're backing and then taking a stroke, and then backing and then taking a stroke, and at least you can keep your muscles moving this way. You won't necessarily move forwards or backwards, but you might be in a situation where you might not be able to do that. And it's important to keep moving in some fashion so that you stay warm. So that can be a very good way when you're waiting, just to keep moving in the boat without taking up any distance. If you've got room, like sometimes you have enough, you can judge and you have enough time, like say your four can swing out and do a loop and then come back and get into line. Sometimes you can afford to do that. But again, it's really going to depend on how much room there is. The starters may have you lined up and you may be sitting there for a bit. So, you have to do something to keep moving.
Yeah. Sometimes you can get out of the boat. You might be on a tidal river. Sometimes there'll be a bank, where you can actually get out and you can jog on the spot and jump up and down. Personally, I always like to take my hands and put them under my armpits. Mm-hmm. It's the warmest place of your body. And my hands get very cold. One of my doubles partners bought me one of those hand warmers where you can break the seal and it radiates heat for a brief period of time. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We tried that. Didn't really work when I got into the race.
Right. And wearing a warm hat. I mean, the best way to stay warm also is to wear a very warm hat that you can take off. Maybe you have a thick fleece hat that you can wear until you start, and then you can take it off before your race starts. And that's not something that's going to add a lot of weight in the boat, but definitely, keeping your hands warm, keeping your head warm is going to keep more of your body warm. But try to think about even stationary drills, tapping drills You can do tapping drills in place as well as the push-pull drill, so that you're moving up and down the slide, but you're still moving, you're working on balance. You're kind of, if you can do this as a crew, you can do it as a single, but you do want to avoid just sitting there and not doing anything, because you will start to cool down, and it's going to be a little bit harder to get up to speed if you have to be sitting there for several minutes.
Often when you're marshalling, it'll be a line of boats, and the boats will be moving up the river towards the start line. I like to hang back and leave a bit of a gap between me and the boat in front. And so you might be, rowing a few strokes, stopping, rowing a few more strokes and stopping. And so I like to do really strong, hard strokes in those few strokes. So I can do like 3 or 4 really big strokes, and I know I've got a bit of distance between me and the boat in front. So at least I'm working hard when I am rowing.
Yeah, well, that's a great strategy too. As long as you're at the right distance when you start, it's okay when you're just marshalling and getting ready to go to the start.
One time at the Sculler's Head in London, which is a single sculls race, I was way down the start order because they start all the men first and all the elites, and I was like, I forget, number 260 something out of 400, and so there was going to be a lot of time, and I worked out based on how many seconds it takes for every boat to start, how long it was likely to be from the start time to when I actually crossed the line. And I was marshaled on the far side of the river from our club, and I rowed over there early. The tide was going out because they raced it on the outgoing tide. I got out, I turned my boat upside down, I went up the bank. There's a pub right there. I went in, I ordered a coffee. I sat in the warm, looking out of the window, counting the numbers of the crews that were rowing past. And of course, you can see the crews in the race as well. So you know who's racing and who's coming up through the marshalling area. And then I went out, turned my boat over, put it on the water, and just joined in.
Great. Well, that's a great strategy. I don't think I've ever raced anywhere where you could even do that, but I think I better go to the UK and do that instead.
I will say, I did not tell anyone, not even my coach ahead of time, that that's what I planned on doing. I'm not sure it made a huge difference, but for me, keeping warm is really important.
Okay. Well, actually, that brings up a really good topic. Take a thermos of hot water, or if there's something, a thermos might weigh a little bit, but still, if it's quite cold and something like that is going to keep you warm, take a thermos of coffee, take a thermos of hot water and drink some warm water as you're warming up, because that is definitely going to help you for sure.
Warm your hands on the outside.
Yeah, exactly.
A brief reminder that we have an ebook called The Ultimate Guide to Head Racing for Masters, which you can get on the link that's on the screen at the moment. The link will also be in the show notes. Just go there, sign up. You will also be joining our newsletter list, but of course you can unsubscribe if you don't want it. There are 8 separate articles in there covering a lot of topics in a lot more detail than Marlene and I have been able to during this particular webinar series. Let's go on to wind and waves. So again, this comes into the category of things you cannot control, but you can row them well. So whether you're in a coxed or a coxless boat, these things happen. You can look at a map of the course and the wind direction from a weather app ahead of time, and you can see the different bends in the river and anticipate that maybe when I've gone under that bridge or round that bend, it's going to turn from a headwind to a side wind or to a tailwind. Or if you're at a place where it's very built up and you have tall buildings, sometimes you get a wind funnel effect with the wind channeling between tall buildings that creates a gust and then a bit of flat water and then another gust that hits you. So knowing where you are going to encounter changes in wind and then the likely effect, of course, of waves is that if you're on a long straight piece and you're rowing in a headwind, the waves are highest at the end of the straight in the direction of the wind. So if it's a headwind, the waves will be highest when you start the straight and they will be lower probably when you finish. It'll get less and less and less as you go through. And of course, with a tailwind, it'll be the opposite. Can you adapt your technique to reflect the wind and wave conditions that you're going to be getting on the race course.
Well, certainly in terms of rowing in rough water, I highly suggest practicing in rougher water at home. And, there are times when people row on very nice water all of the time, and then they go to a different course and a regatta course, and they deal with different current and different rough water, and they're just really not able to carry their oars high enough off the water and stabilize the boat in that rough water. So I would seek out some rough water training for sure in practice to make sure that you're able to stabilize your boat, that the crew is communicating with each other, how high they need to carry their oars off the water. If you have a crosswind, that can be really challenging because the crosswind is also going to try to push you down to the opposite side. And one of the techniques that I like to use into a crosswind is, your crosswind is always going to try to tip you a little bit. So whichever side the rigger is higher, apply a bit more pressure into that rigger to help bring that rigger down into the crosswind to keep the boat level. So, it is challenging, and you have to look at the course and look at the direction of the wind and have a plan of where the conditions can change as you go along the course as well. So you want to know a bit what to expect so that you don't shorten up your stroke in a headwind, so that you can stay, keep your stroke length into the headwind, and maybe, focus on really using your body weight a bit more into the headwind. And I think it's important not to let the wind rush you. And, even if you're in, you might be in gusty conditions, so it might not be a steady wind. It might surprise you, but I still think it's important to row one stroke at a time, pay attention to what you're doing, try not to let the wind control what you're doing, and and be ready for some of those unexpected challenges. The wind might catch your blade, it might be a little bit of a gust, but I think, be patient, one stroke at a time. And if you focus on each stroke and trying to be as clean as you possibly can, you'll work your way. Everybody's rowing in the same conditions, so you're going to work your way through it. But it's important not to get nervous because of the windy conditions, and not to let it rush you so that you're not able to clearly think about what you're doing.
Definitely, you want to be controlling the oars with more deliberate movements. As Marlene says, you don't want to let the wind control what happens to your oars. So that might mean you need to be more deliberate about when you square, more deliberate about lifting your handles up into the catch. If the wind catches your blade when you square, which is a reasonable assumption, it may blow it high, which pushes your hands down. So you can counter that by being very deliberate with upward movement of the handle towards the placement. The other thing that you should do is practice before you get to the race, what your response will be to what happens after a disruption caused by wind or waves. So my preference is, if there's a gust of wind, as the gust and use it to get the boat moving again after the disruption, to get back onto your pattern. So these are things that you can definitely practice. And if you're in a Cox boat, or if you're a steers person and you can look around, look at the surface of the water. Sometimes you can see the stippling on the surface of the water of a wind gust, so you can warn the crew what to expect, so that they know a gust is coming. They don't know to keep their length, as Marlene said earlier, maybe to try and push through it, and then to push on again after it to try and prevent shortening up. So wind and waves are going to happen. The key is you just need to be ready to respond to them and to do your best to get back onto your pattern of rowing. It is the same for everyone. And I remember one time when I was again racing on the Tideway, and we came under Hammersmith Bridge, and it was really rough on the far side of the bridge. It was just laughable. And I looked around and like, oh my goodness, it looks like the North Sea. This is whatever.
Dear.
And I just decided there and then, like you said, it's the same for everyone. So I might as well make the best of it. And so I literally laughed out loud. I looked around and went, that's just, and tried to respond with good technique. But the laughing had a really interesting side effect, is it really relaxed me. I was like, I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to stress about trying to race through all of this. It's going to happen. And I got through it. I got a good result, I think, because I was relaxed as I was rowing. Steve makes a great suggestion here. Ask the locals about where any areas of crosswinds are. Great advice.
Yes,
Local
absolutely.
knowledge, really, really worthwhile.
I rode in this race. This was quite a long time ago. I think this must be in the late 90s. And in the state of Maine, the Maine Rowing Association had a summer series of head races, which were really fun to do. But the first one of the year was up at a lake called Moosehead Lake, which is quite far north in Maine. It's really up there. Even from Vermont, it's really up there. And we went up, and it's like the third week of June. So the water's really cold. And it was actually a triangular course. So the start and the finish was the same point, but we're rowing like a 5K, but in a triangle. And it started getting so rough. And I mean, I kind of had this reaction like Rebecca, and I thought, okay, well, we're going to just rock and roll. And, that's it. We're just going to rock and roll through this race. And by the end of the race, my foot stretchers were completely underwater. My feet were in cold, cold water. I mean, I was still afloat fine, but my whole boat was full of water. And, and it was just like, well, okay, one stroke at a time. And off we go, and we got through it. Nobody sank, but it was quite the experience.
So using that as an example, Marlene, talk us through turning buoys or buoys in a race, because some head races are out and back races, not just in one direction.
Right. And I mean, this particular course was a triangular course, which sometimes it's not as usual, but in Maine, they like to do triangular courses. So this was a triangular course. So we actually had to turn two buoys 90 degrees. So when you could sight the buoy, you really wanted to aim at the buoy. I mean, again, it depended on where the wind was coming at, but you wanted to try to aim at that buoy so that you could hold water on the inside. I mean, this is the way I did it, but hold water on the inside close to the buoy and then bring it around on the outside of the turn. And in this case, it was with the starboard oar, enough so that you were straight, and then we had to row straight into the next buoy and then bring it around again. In a race that is an out and back, a race, for example, in Vermont, there's a race, the Green Mountain Head, which you start, then you turn two buoys. You turn one buoy, you have to row a few strokes, you have to turn another buoy, and then back to the starting line, which is also the finish line. And in a race like that, again, you have to try to hold water as little as you need to help turn the boat, so you can bring the boat around with, in this case, it was with the starboard, go straight, turn it around again. And then when you were heading back to, and you're bringing it around really hard on starboard. So when you straighten out, I used to put in a flying start or moving start, just again, to get your boat back up to boat speed as quickly as you can, but also be prepared that starboard arm is going to feel really like it's got a cramp. It's going to feel a bit tired and fatigued for a few strokes until you get going again. So I do think it's something that you should practice for sure. before you go to the race. And you should really try, think about doing this at race pace so that you're bringing the boat around hard and you're really rowing hard with that starboard arm so that you know a bit what to expect when you're going to get up to speed, and practice those turns, because it also depends on, how big the buoy is. Sometimes the buoys can be quite large. Sometimes it might just be something, the size of a regular buoy on a sprint course, but you just don't know until you get there.
That's right. Can you get your oar over the top of it? One word of warning with regards to steering is it can be very tempting when you're turning around the buoy to row off before checking that you've got your direction right for the next piece of the race, because you think, I need to reduce the amount of time. I'm wasting time, going slow here while I'm turning. But actually, if you then have to steer a second time when you're back rowing again in order to correct your course, you will slow your boat down more, in my view. You're far better to turn, do an extra 2 or 3 strokes in order to get your bows correctly pointing where you need to go next before you row off and do that rolling start to get going again that Marlene mentioned earlier. I will also say that if you're the steers person, remember to look over both shoulders at that point while the boat is being turned by the crew or by yourself. But the view from your left and the view from your right is not always the same. And so, if you can get going pretty straight towards the next target, and as Marlene says, aim straight for the buoy, even if it's, only 15 strokes away, unless there's a really strong current, you can make a very small steering correction to get around it. But aiming straight for it, they're usually an easy target because they're colored red or yellow, they're bright. And it's easy to see. It's much harder to see small things in the distance, particularly in the middle of a race, or particularly when you're short-sighted.
I think, and also if you're, depending on what size boat you're in and what kind of buoy you have to turn, I mean, you do always have that option to back on the inside oar if you have time and if you think that that's going to help you turn faster. And, again, it depends on how the buoys are set up. You may be able to back a little bit rather than just bringing it around on starboard and pivoting around that inside oar. But if you're in a larger boat, you might want to practice that as well and see, how much space do you need to make those turns.
My preference is always to go into the buoy wide and come out close to it. So start your turn away from it. And then finish if you think of a turn as a parabola curve, so that you start wide and then you finish the turn and come away being quite close to it. Now, you may get disrupted in that plan because other boats are nearby. But that, for me, means that you can make some steering before you actually have to stop and check it, so that you approach the buoy. So you don't have a full 90 degrees in your example to do. You can do maybe 65 degrees turning just with one arm, and the other is done ahead of time. So next week, we're going to conclude our head racing series with coxing longer races. And we have some exciting guests who are going to be joining us. And it will be relevant to people who are in cox boats because you can then guide your coxswain as to what to do. But also it's going to tie in with race plans more generally. And so even if you're in a coxless boat or a single scull, you should also get some benefit from the head racing series next episode, which is about coxing head races. Till next time. Bye-bye.
If you're part of the Rowing Chat Podcast Network, please tell your rowing friends about the show. And if you've learned just one helpful thing from today's episode, please consider supporting the show for as little as $1 per month by visiting fastermastersrowing.com/podcast.